My guest today is Dr. Christof Plothe. Christof, welcome to the EMF Remedy Podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Keith. It's a pleasure.
Well, I've been looking forward to this for some time. You have both experience as a clinician and also an interest over many years on the electromagnetic issue. But I'm wondering if we could start our conversation with the World Council for Health, as I would like my followers to be aware of the organization and your involvement in it. Could you give us a brief explanation of what is the World Council for Health and what is your role in that organization?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm not a traditional doctor. I'm a DO. I'm an osteopath, and so I joined the World Council for Health 3 years ago because I saw a new medical model through an international organization. We are now in over 60 countries and try to, with the awakening of our so-called healthcare system, to establish new ideas for the future. So we're trying to educate people on basic health matters that started, of course, with the events of the last few years. But it goes a lot further, and one big part is what you're doing here as well, to teach people about the potential role of EMF poisoning of our environment and us humans. I'm the head of the science committee there, and I'm also part of the steering committee of the World Council for Health. So we, of course, are very happy to share what we do believe, and we do believe strongly in not a centralized medical model, but a decentralized with openness to many, many opinions, because that's what science is all about. Yeah.
And that's one of the hallmarks that I've noticed with your organization is the sort of a democratic process, and that people are welcome to question the information that's being provided, and it's very open for many to contribute, and favoring the basis of clinical experience with people. So for folks who have not had the opportunity, I would encourage them to check it out. I believe it is worldcouncilforhealth.org. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right.
And just because, and I should mention that we're on different continents, and I'm out in the country, so we have slow internet. So we may have a couple of lags in our conversation, but I would ask people for their grace as we move forward. So there may be people who are not familiar. You're a physician, but you're not a medical doctor. You're an osteopath. So I know there is much to that, but could you briefly describe what the difference is?
Well, the traditional osteopath from the 19th century, where the therapy was actually founded, was to have a holistic medical approach. The founder of osteopathy, he was an engineer, he was a medical doctor, and he was a priest. So that was an interesting experience, how then he tried to find alternatives, because he lost several children in a meningitis epidemic, to find another way of addressing the root causes of disease. And he found a lot in the impeded ability of the body to log into its own pharmacy. And that's why he looked at the body and found obstruction in the connective tissue in the body, and with manual techniques, you're able to open up an organ, a part of the brain, a muscle, or any anatomical feature, and thus let the forces of life, that's what he called it, enter the particular parts. It has been included in the US into the medical system, so the traditional form is not really the main part of the teaching, but it's still being taught. Otherwise, you have the same rights than a physician in England, where I was trained. It's very similar to what you have at the end in terms of a degree. But the way that I'm also a naturopath, the way I practice it is really with a purely naturopathic and manual approach.
So let's talk about my favorite topic, which is the electromagnetic spectrum, and it is such an interesting topic for me. The way that I see it is that this Earth came with an electromagnetic environment that was natural to it, and it's very complex. And there are some very obvious things that we just don't consider. Just one example of which would be that a compass points to the north consistently around the world. It's not a very small electromagnetic force. It's a very large one. And there are other parts to it, which we won't necessarily get into unless you'd like. But then what's been happening increasingly over time, particularly in the last 100 to 150 years, is that we've been overriding or adding to that electromagnetic environment with forces that are dissimilar to what exists on the Earth, what's native to the Earth. I would call it synthetic EMF. Some people would take exception and say I should speak about EMF separately from radio frequency radiation. I understand the distinction, but I just use the term synthetic EMF. And so it is with, I think, the synthetic EMF and its propagation through the world in mankind's quest for convenience, amusement, and stimulation, convenience in electric lighting and motors and amusement in YouTube and television and radio, and stimulation in social media and pornography and things like that. That seems to be driving the radio frequency radiation portion, which is so problematic to so many people. So that's a bit of how I see the world, and therefore, if we were to view synthetic EMF and question why it is causing so much harm to so many people, my belief, and I really want to hear from you, but my belief is it's an environmental toxin. It's an environmental toxin very much like other environmental toxins. And so when you view it that way, the mystery of getting better from it is quit taking it, quit exposing yourself, which can be then quite problematic. So I've laid out quite a bit there. I would like you to disagree on anything there, but give me your perspective of the synthetic EMF exposure problem as you see it.
Well, please feel free to criticize me in anything I'm saying as well. That's how I want to start. Excuse me. Well, basically, I've always looked in amazement that when you still start talking about EMFs, you're considered an aluminium head or anything, a conspiracy theorist or anything, whilst nature all around us is basically determined by electromagnetic fields and frequencies. Yeah, if you look at the smallest portion of an atom, you know that there is a positive and neutral charge in the middle and negative electrons floating around it, and these forces determine how a molecule is being shaped and eventually turns into a human being or into a plant. So the entire universe is basically being created out of these fields, and they are in forces that are 0.0000000.1 smaller than everything we're encountering at the moment. Just to see that in embryology, little particles are moving together and start forming a heart or a brain. They're conducted by electrical fields. And to me, it's almost an amazement. And I often say, because we share that passion for that topic. I used to do education at schools about that topic, and I went through trying to prevent it from being implemented in the German school system, EMF devices, that is. I went to the Bundestag. I presented in front of the European government, European Parliament. I tried everything, but it's a powerful force that we're up against. So still, it's being ridiculed, whilst so many medical procedures in daily life, an EEG and ECG, to look at the brain function, the heart function, the muscle function, is basically all measured with electric devices. And we can see the changes in all of them when an EMF device is being activated in the background. So it's not like, we have to wait as we do with mobile phones to heat up our brains. We can look at so many non-thermal effects to discover that there are thousands of studies proving non-thermal effects on the body, and not just in us humans, but in nature. I often, when giving courses about it, I just go with people and ask them to observe nature around you. And you can see that more and more trees have the top of the trees dying and falling down. Here in Europe, they say it's the drought, but it has nothing to do with it, because you can go to trees that live next to a river and you'll see the same phenomena. Birch trees nowadays, they're very, very affected. Why? We don't know about EMF, but they're crooked. They grow completely crooked. They don't grow straight anymore. And especially in the last 2 years, considering what a rollout we've had on even a new technology that no safety studies had ever been produced. I mean, the first mobile phones were introduced at the beginning of the 80s, and then slowly one thing was added to the next one. But the cumulative effect and the interference with other frequencies, plus you said an environmental toxin with all the other toxin. I'm not just saying about metals that work like an antenna in a body and will for sure enhance the toxicity of it. But please consider that all studies in the medical systems, the way we have it at the moment, are on a reductionist basis. So we're only looking at one criteria, one frequency, and this doesn't exist anymore. It's all additive, it's accumulative, it's synergistic, and it's not only those frequencies. We have 2, 3, 3G, 4G, 5G. You have the toy, you have the kitchen machine that's being activated and radiating some frequencies. We have loads of frequencies that are not even regulated all around us. In this soup of man-made, pulsed and high intensity frequencies that are completely unnatural to our system, of course we will see changes, and of course we would feel differently. Well, because they're all accustomed to it now. We've already talked about this. You can only feel the difference when you actually get out of these fields, but that's another topic that we can talk about later on.
And it's becoming more difficult to get out of the fields. There's a wonderful study that Arthur Furstenberg wrote about in his book, The Invisible Rainbow, and it was a Japanese condominium complex, and there was a very wise doctor and a nurse who went in. This condominium had mobile phone antennas on top of the roof, and it was planned to remove the antennas from the roof. Now, this was some years ago when maybe that was the only environmental exposure. I can't say, I haven't been there. But what happened was very dramatic. The doctor did examinations on people in the building who volunteered for such, and he found so many medical issues with them that after the removal of the antennas from the building, there was a dramatic change in the health of the residents, and all of the things that we associate with what we call today electrical sensitivity, what I prefer to call electromagnetic poisoning, just seemed to go away. So that's perhaps an illustration of what you're saying. Today, it's so hard to find an environment where the removal of one antenna would leave you with a pristine environment. And used to be where you could just go camping, but now Wi-Fi is a feature of many campgrounds. And the mobile phone service seems to be ubiquitous. So you had some experience trying to address this problem some years ago, providing a place that people could be without electromagnetic exposure. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, just one comment, maybe to Arthur Firstenberg's work, because I wrote a paper with him and Professor Johansson last year about the imminent dangers of this technology and what we are already expecting, experiencing at the moment. Yeah, so I do see on a daily basis here in my practice things that I now correlate strongly with EMF exposure. Yeah, maybe I'll start with that. Yeah, and that's maybe something that all viewers can do themselves. You can just look in the mirror and you can stick out your tongue. Try to do that and watch your tongue. And if you've been exposed to EMF, which 99.9% of all viewers will have during the day, they will see trembling of the tongue. They can't really hold the tongue still anymore. And this is because of the high activation of the central nervous system, because it's a cranial nerve that supplies actually the tongue. So the more exposure to EMF you've had during the day, the more this tongue will be almost uncontrollable. Yeah. If we're now at a place like yours, you stick out the tongue, look in the mirror, you can actually still see the tongue in a resting state. If you're in a city or if children come from school, sometimes their tongue is going like this. Yeah. So that's the one thing I show people. If you want to assess quantitatively, I never did a study about it, but I hope one day we don't only have to rely on studies, but also on clinical experience to look into certain topics, because otherwise it will take years and years. You know, the NTP study took 19 years to be finally over. We can't wait. So that's why I'm putting this out here at the moment. This is a personal experience and it's like a personal observational study. And the second thing is that there is a scientist in Germany, Professor von Klitzing. He's in Berlin and he does experiments with putting people in a Faraday cage, so where no EMF interference from the inside or the outside can occur, and then activates a Wi-Fi router. And then he looks at specific criteria. He looks at an EEG, brain function, at an EMG, muscle tone. He looks at an ECG, the heart, and he looks also at the circulation. And he found not in all, and in some more in the heart, and with others more in the brain, with others more in the muscle tone. He found significant changes, and sometimes even asystolic periods when he turned on the Wi-Fi router in the back of a few seconds. So the heart stopped beating for a few seconds. Yeah. So he found all of this. He tried to publish it, and he has been a renowned scientist who published in many, many very, very prestigious journals, but nobody wanted to publish his work. So he also coined the term a Wi-Fi memory effect. And this is the one thing that I find in practice every day. So I put people on the couch, supine, and I'll ask them to have their knees in 90 degrees on the table, if you can imagine. And then I rotate the hip. And in modern times, because of the increased muscle tone that people are experiencing, the average hip doesn't really rotate much more than 30 degrees, whilst it should be 80 to 90 degrees. So this, I'm treating professional athletes, soccer players, and from other specialties in Germany. I see this even in really, really super fit athletes that they literally are stiff. Yeah. So why am I correlating this to EMF, and how can I convince people that actually they can correlate themselves that with it? I use a tuning fork. Yeah. If I can start maybe with that. So that's a tuning fork. We tested a lot of them. That's 136.1 hertz. So the longer the deeper the frequency, the more effect it will have to break the resonance with the Wi-Fi router, the mobile phone that you might have used a few hours beforehand. Because the Wi-Fi memory effect indicates that even if you've only been exposed to about 30 minutes with a Wi-Fi router, in your cells might still vibrate in the 10 hertz frequency of the Wi-Fi router for up to 2 days. He just put an oscilloscope, just saw the resonance with it. And this is one thing why I'm very adamant that nobody nowadays can escape the effects. I had a conversation today with somebody who lives during the night in a cage, has built a huge cage under his house and sleeps very, very well there, which I can understand. But the thing is, he still has to disconnect from the frequencies that he encountered during the day. So what we do, we just get them. I can put, maybe you can hear the frequency. So we put the frequency on the osseous structures, on the bones of the skull, on the chest bone. We put them on the knees and on the ankles. Anybody can do that. And it's like shaking your system out of the resonance with the Wi-Fi or the mobile phone. We have children that fall asleep here in the practice because we have no mobile phones or no Wi-Fi. We have nothing. And we ask all patients to turn off their mobile devices if they enter the practice. So people lie down there. And another symptom that people experience nowadays are these muscle twitches. They're almost like fasciculations, what they call them in medical terms, little switches that you see all over their body. And sometimes you have these people that have it with their eyes, then they get investigated for a tic. In every school class nowadays, I have at least 5 school kids that have these tics, sometimes with their head or sometimes just with their eyes. And if you do the tuning fork and you ask them a few measures that you so beautifully sum up what people can do in order to reduce their radiation at home. So I guess every viewer that watches this here knows about your activities. If you implement all of this, and you are not unfortunate that somebody put a 5G tower just in front of your house or anything like it, then you're able to reduce all of these signs. Or your tongue just remains very intact and doesn't fasciculate and doesn't tremble all the time. You get very relaxed because your autonomic nervous system will react to that as well. It will really distress you. And the other thing is you can see it in the muscle tone. If you do that with a tuning fork, the children then will have all of a sudden 90-degree rotation of their hips again. So that's one thing that helps a little bit to convey the message that, there is an influence from an invisible, odorless, yet tasteless substance around them that's poisoning their body. I listened to Dr. Moskowitz's latest presentation. You might have watched it as well on the topic, and all the studies and the fact that all the agencies that should take care of our health now abandoned all research because they considered it to be completely safe. A huge scandal. And whilst we don't even have real data in order to have any safety limits or anything like it, we can then demonstrate to people what change in the system occurs. And to your original question, of my own experience getting out of this soup, that was in 2010. We set up a practice, a clinic in Brazil, and our main aim was to have a clinic without EMF influence from the outside. So some people might know Dr. Klinghardt or Professor Ionescu. Dr. Mutter is a very well-known environmental doctor. So we had very, very wonderful people amongst us, and also holistic dentists. And then we took neurological patients into this clinic setting, which unfortunately didn't survive very long because of ego problems. But the fact was that everybody who was down there was no mobile device. It was completely free. We ate organic food. We had water from a waterfall. So we were in a completely natural environment, being exposed to all the natural frequencies, because as you already mentioned, we're continuously influenced by natural frequency, the light around us, the magnetic field of our Earth that's switching, and the influences from just the different spectrums from the sun, the earthing of being connected with negative ions on the surface of our planet. So we're constantly influenced by frequencies, fields that are very healthy for us. We took patients down there to Brazil, and we had the most amazing detoxification in people without us doing anything. And we did blood tests with the patients. We found the most amazing changes when it came to inflammatory markers or other by just putting people in an EMF-free environment. We had patients with severe neurological diseases that improved without anything being done. With cardiac problems, we had one of our doctors actually had a severe cardiac problem. That's another story in itself, how he got there. He himself said that his heart function must have improved by at least 3/4 because he felt so healthy and could walk around without any breathing problems. As soon as we entered the plane, all of that reversed, and yeah, he could hardly breathe. It was a very, very fascinating experience that I'll never forget. And it was like really like having a helmet on when getting into the next airport at Sao Paulo. And beforehand, you felt your entire system opening up. And maybe one thing, say there before I hand it over to you again, it was as an osteopath, you also feel the movement in the tissues. Yeah, there is an inherent rhythm of 6 to 8 times in the body tissues. And I used to teach postgraduate courses all over the world. And I stopped completely because I can't teach the students anymore what it was all about, because it's also a reflection of the vitality of the tissues in a human being. And whilst it was like this in the past 20 years ago, I'm talking about this phenomena here in our times.
Well, that's absolutely amazing. And I know you don't. You live in the countryside. Not too large of a city, I guess. And to have that be the case, even there, the clinic that you described in Brazil. Oh my goodness! I wish we had those around the world. And what that would be like for people to be able to, let's say, go for a weekend or go for a week, not necessarily needing a prescription from their doctor, just maybe they want to see what it feels like to get away from all of the synthetic EMF that we're layering on layer after layer in our communities. And I believe that wonderful things could happen if people could see that. Now, there is no logical reason why we have, for example, Wi-Fi being deployed in classrooms or mobile phones being deployed in entire communities with cell mast after mast after mast. Because I say that because there was an abundance of research already available before the first mobile phone and before the first Wi-Fi router that indicated very problematic things like cardiac effect, immediate cardiac effect. And this is in the public research. And also raising the question of affecting the blood-brain barrier and having an effect on human hearing and all of these things. So it was without really logic, I think, when we began adding all of these things to our society. And I'll be interested to get your comments on that. What you've offered in terms of a method of being able to determine whether you or somebody you love is being affected by synthetic EMF is to observe the tongue, the observation that you've had with regard to hip movement. These are not the problems in and of themselves, that the tongue oscillates or that the hips are not giving full flexion. It's simply an indication an obvious indication that you are being affected, whereas the effects are, I'll love your comments on this, unbounded, truly unbounded. Dr. Martin Paul talks about the calcium-gated voltage channel issue as being a known mechanism of harm. I think there are probably many others, but one known mechanism of harm is the voltage-gated calcium channel, which leads to overabundance of calcium within the cells and a dysregulation of that capacity of the cell to manage how much intracellular calcium. And down along the line, it results in inflammation, chronic inflammation, which I understand to be the fountainhead of all chronic disease. So could you comment?
Well, I remember talking with Martin Pall, the professor you just mentioned, in 2020 on a 5G conference, and he was not very optimistic when it came to survival of the human species, as you know. And actually, we're coming close to the time where he predicted that we would just, not make it any further. So we're not talking about a phenomena in a few decades, a few hundred years. We're talking about right now. Yeah. So you mentioned that we knew this data before we introduced the first mobile phones. Very rightly so. We have the reports that were handed over to the American Senate and in the late 70s, in 1979. And we have the same here for Germany. And it was Professor Hecht here in Germany who actually analyzed over 800 studies from the former Soviet Union about the effects that he stated in his report for the government. And unfortunately, he passed away 2 years ago, but was a wonderful human being. And a real genius. He summarized for the German government that all of these studies prove damage in all organ systems. So, he could prove the damage in your heart, of the kidneys, of pancreas, of brain, all of which we know by now as well. And he said it shouldn't be implemented because it's too dangerous. But the report said that, due to economic reasons to be still competitive with other countries that have the rollout of it, and because of military reasons, we have to accept this technology. So that's how it all started. But just to give you an overview, we're talking at this stage of studies that we're talking about 20 to 30 micrometers per square meters. Yeah, microwatts per square meters. Yeah, that was ridiculous. If we look at the exposure we're being exposed to now, just to give you an example, I had a cancer patient that was doing very, very well for 2 years. He had only 3 months to live, and he was following guidelines, and he was living a very, very good life with all system actually improving. And all of a sudden, in May, he started to have all his markers going in the wrong direction. And then we looked at what it could have been, and we didn't find anything. He hadn't changed anything in his diet or in the supplements he was taking. So nothing. And then we found that his tongue was shaking a lot and he got stiffer and stiffer. So we found out that he was helping his son to renovate a house in a bigger city. So I gave him the EMF meter, and just keeping in mind, as we just said, it was 10 to 30 microwatts per square meters that actually made professionals at the beginning to say no to this technology. We were measuring 1.5 million microwatts per square meter in that town. 1.5 million. I know intensity is not the only thing we should look at, but if you just look at this in itself and know that in many countries it would be far above the limit. Here in Europe, it's still a very, very crazy limit that's considered by some of the states. Germany has one of the highest. Japan has the highest of 6.5 million. Germany 4.5 million. But if you go to Switzerland, we're talking about 200,000 microwatts per square meter. So it would be above the limit of individual states within Europe and in other parts of the world as well. And as you said, there's so many effects. It's not just calcium channels. You can look at all kinds of mechanisms. We know about oxidative stress. If you just want to pinpoint it in one direction, that is inflammation. And we can see it here. I lost many, many cancer patients at the moment where a public Wi-Fi was installed in front of their house, or the children wanted to take better care of grandpa and gave him a new mobile phone into his house. to have all these diseases, and I'm talking about most chronic diseases nowadays, have as their base inflammation. So if you pour more inflammation, it's like, just taking some oil and putting it over the flame. You will see the increase, and you will also see the decrease of symptoms if you reduce it. I could talk for ages. Just one example, maybe, if you don't mind, from today. I had a patient, and she had a frozen shoulder, so a phenomena where your shoulder gets stiffer and stiffer, and it's really painful. Luckily, it resolves itself after a year, but I see that more and more. I had one maybe once a year, 20 years ago. Now I see them every week. This woman, she went into a hotel and stayed there for 3 months, and she was working the whole day on her Wi-Fi. She came back, and she could hardly move her shoulder anymore. It was completely stiff. And so we then tried to, because it was already resolving at that moment, it was very unusual that it relapsed. So then we gave her the order to write her next book at a place where she had no Wi-Fi. And she just came back. I just saw her yesterday. And she had 3 months no Wi-Fi and was using a cable for her laptop, and was out in nature and getting negative ions from the sea in front of her. And it completely resolved. It had resolved within 6 weeks. So these are all inflammatory processes. And when you pour it onto it, you will increase the inflammation.
So I'm sure by now people are thinking, what can they do? What I see is that there are many people who are saying, I know there's a problem. At least they're saying it in a part of maybe their subconscious. And what I see as the manifestation of that is they actually take action. Now, unfortunately, they take action which is useless, in my opinion, and I would love you to talk about this as well, but they will go out and they will buy a harmonizer or a crystal or some kind of a mineral, and put it in their house, or they'll buy a very expensive, very pretty looking neutralizer or a chip that they put on their phone. And this is not going to do it. So I actually think it's very good news, because it means that at some level people are reckoning with, this is a toxic environment we're in. But unfortunately, they're taking the wrong step, which is harmonizers, neutralizers, pendants, chips, minerals, whatever. So your comments on that, please.
Well, I don't know if you've seen the study of Dr. Müller here from Germany about EEG changes from G. He was just looking at, he installed a flexible EEG on heads of drivers, and he drove with them past a 4G mask or a 5G mask. And with a 4G mask, you can see the activity of the brain at that part. Yeah, each time they passed the mask, you could see, whoa, the outer 1/8 of the central nervous system began to show abnormal signals. But when they passed the 5G one, the entire core of the central nervous system, not from the outside, the core of the central nervous system, about 1/3 to 2/3 of the brain was under high stress. You can imagine what this does to our thinking, and to our memory, and to our mood. And please, everybody who's watching this, they can think of themselves how much they feel their concentration going, or the memory leaving them from time to time. I'm not talking about demented people. I'm just talking even teenagers, and also their cognitive behavior, and their state of their empathy, and all of these factors that make up us as human beings. And you said the symptoms, the signs of the tongue and the muscle tone, they're just symptoms. Yeah, you have an irritation of the central nervous system. Yeah, that's basically controlling every part of our body. You have the same with the autonomic nervous system. So you have this symphony of attack on our system, and you can only find your way back if you get out of it, which in our modern world is almost impossible. And what you in our first conversation told me is one of the things that I tell my patients as well. At least make your home magnetic field, electromagnetic field, and high frequency safer. The more you can, start with your bedroom, start with your working space. Nobody needs mobile phone, tablets, or anything wirelessly at home. You can all use an Ethernet micro USB or USB-C adapter. That you can get that anywhere. You can make your home, but you need to measure it. Yeah, that's the one thing I always ask people to do. I know you have wonderful tips without the EMF meter, and I think that's the way to move forward, so people can move their bed a little bit from one side to the next, and to get the experience themselves. I find it very useful if people have the way to measure magnetic fields, electromagnetic fields, and the high frequencies, but not everybody can afford the meters. That's the other thing. So it's good to start with simple aspects that people can implement in their lives. And one of the simplest ways that what I advise people to do are two things. If they think that they can't, because it's not just one transmitter in a mobile phone, we have many, you have GPS, Bluetooth, internet, and all of these together. If people say, oh no, I can't live without this and this feature of my mobile phone, and I say, well, that's up to you. But what about putting some tinfoil in a book? Open the book and put a tinfoil in there, put the mobile phone in between, and then put it out so it just radiates in front of the window. So it just basically radiates outside of the window and not into your home. Try to make sure that it's in contact with the glass and not the metal frame around it that doesn't reflect. But yeah, just get a shield from that mobile device you have in there. And I advise that with people that are at their working place, or they think, they can't do without it at home. And you can see the most amazing exchanges in people by doing simple steps. If they don't have their laptop still connected to Wi-Fi, of course, and if you don't have huge electromagnetic fields around their working space, which many people don't know that they have.
Wonderful. So we'll move towards concluding our conversation here, maybe just a couple of last comments here. And one area that we haven't had an opportunity to think about or to talk about, in this conversation is the fact that this is a unique attack in that, in place of any data suggesting that these wireless technologies are without harm, what we have is adoption. And so people feel comfortable in the bottom line because the person to their left and the person to their right are using Wi-Fi, and they're using mobile phones and whatnot. And so we've had a normalization in place of good science that says, yes, there is no harm. So it's going to take fortitude, and it's going to take individual action. If you're able, perhaps with the help of a local qualified EMF consultant, find a pristine place, spend some time there. That perhaps will teach more than anything else could. But just because we have seen things normalized, that doesn't mean that it must be accepted. And it's my thought, and I'll get yours on this, that this is all cumulative. The harm that comes from synthetic EMF exposure is cumulative. And that seems to be the experience of the people that I serve through my efforts, is that they were able to endure and endure and endure. And then at some point they reached a breaking point and became sensitized, and then their life changed forever after that. And then I'll just say that, we've talked about a lot of grim things, and it's time. It's time to be very direct, and it's time to acknowledge how deep the harm can be, and it can be such that it's subtle. You may not realize that your capacity for thought is being impacted because, again, the person to your either side, they're having theirs impacted as well. But you can take action. And if it is indeed cumulative in terms of harm, start taking action. Perhaps get a wired phone in your house, as Christof was talking about. Move from wireless to wired, and there are so many other things that can result in measurable, not just imaginary, but measurable reductions to exposure. So I'll let you have the last word, please, Christof.
Well, there's a lot I'd like to add to this point. First of all, maybe that if we would have any other technology that would have shown any effect that we know by now through all the studies that have been accumulated on this technology so far, we would expect certain changes. But because we have our medical agencies that are responsible for it being paid 80 to 90% by the industry, we can't really rely on the fact that they should give us an independent opinion what health could be. And apart from the fact that we mentioned at the beginning that also the military is using it everywhere, and we know all the capacities, if you dig a little bit deeper into it, how much they can actually use it in terms of diagnosis, using to collect all the information of everybody. That's a topic in itself of our time, and even to use it as a weapon. So there are many things that we have to consider that are out of our scope of this conversation, but that prevent it from being just a neutral perspective that we could start working on. Yeah, I'm not going into any theory. I'm just saying there is a huge interest in terms of industry, intelligence services, blah, blah, blah. Lots of agencies that are very important for the existence of a state that are not really very fond of you saying that I don't like my mobile phone and putting it away. Yeah. So that's the one thing. The second thing is, as I've tried so many different paths in order to convey, to bring across a message that this is certainly harming us and our planet to a degree that most of us can't perceive. And it's not just here. We're also invading the space above us and putting satellite after satellite above us in order to nuke this planet. This can't be good. Yeah, it's just, I ask everybody just to be in common sense. This can't be good. And then to get this experienced, as you mentioned, what I ask people to, I know we've talked about this as well, to at least get out in nature a few times a day, get infrared into their homes, use the tuning fork in order to deconnect, get earthing out there in nature. And if you can, spend time in nature. We actually had a project before COVID in which we wanted to teach people how we rely on nature, with getting people really in an EMF-free zone in centers all over the world, feeding them organic food, earthing them during the day, and not being overloaded with information. That's another aspect that we haven't talked about, what this digital world brings with us, because that's not very healthy. That in itself, we get now the amount of information in one day that we had in a year prior to World War II. So just to get an overview of how much information in bits we're getting that we certainly evolutionary wise are not adapted to. That's a fact. And it makes us dumber. It really, there's a German professor who can study it intensively, learning, created a wonderful theory out of it. And the more information we got through our hippocampus in our body, then less dopamine was released from our frontal lobes. So the less we were able to think. And this happens. And the loss of empathy. You know from the studies from Asia that almost 1/3 of the limbic system, that part of emotions being for empathy towards yourself, towards others and nature, is now 1/3 less than in the last generations of teenagers when they dissected the brains. This should really alert us if we continue this way and we don't make it a personal experience because the revolution can't come from above. There's no way. We can inform politicians and governments as much as we want. It won't change anything. And all of us are now getting aware of this and do experience, learning by experience themselves. I think you're doing a wonderful job in doing this. And when people feel the difference, I remember how we started experimenting with all these fields, and I went with meters and in a restaurant measured every single thing and knew that if one was sitting next to the electric socket, the field would be so big that person would become a little bit irrational after half an hour. And that happened. If you really make it practical to see how they're hugely important frequencies, that regulate our body, Schumann frequencies in our atmosphere, and all the beautiful frequencies that are even resonated by every plant or any other human being, because you can measure them. It's an interaction not only from cells but organisms, and that's things that keep us alive. If we reconnect to that, and make it experienceable, people can wake up. It's not going to be all of us that wake up straight away, but the more people we can reach with that knowledge, then better. So thank you so much for your work.
Thank you very much. And electrical energies are inseparable from life, not only for people, but every living thing on the planet. And so corrupting those electrical energies is not helpful for anyone or anything. Christof, thank you for your longstanding passion about this particular topic, for your daily work in helping others, and for your contributions that you've made through the World Council for Health. I appreciate your being here. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for your passion in that work, and thank you for reaching out to as many people as possible and informing them about the simple. One thing that I found, the truth is always simple. So, there are no gadget out there will save us, but simple instructions and to get out in nature to make it palpable. Thanks for spreading that message, and thanks for your time.